Instagram's about a short burst of inspiration, effectively. That's what you want in your photo. Either that short burst of inspiration or something that gets you talking and commenting.
Business of Architecture, episode 234. Hello, Architect Nation. I'm Enoch Sears, and this is the podcast for architects, where you'll discover tips, strategies, and secrets for running a profitable and impactful architecture practice. As a podcast listener, get free instant access to my 4-part architecture firm profit map by going to freearchitectgift.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of BQE Core. BQE Core is office management software for architecture and design professionals. Get rid of the Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets and get real-time insights on the profitability of your firm with a simple, beautiful, and easy to customize graphical dashboard. Say goodbye to undercharging or ending the year wondering where all that profit went. Core gives you the power you need to grow your firm. Learn more and get a free trial over at businessofarchitecture.com/demo. Today, my colleague Ryan Willard takes the mic again and interviews celebrated London-based designer and Renaissance man Adam Nathaniel Furman. Furman has become a bit of an Instagram sensation with over 18,000 followers on Instagram who follow his work and posts. Also, I encourage you to go over to his website, check out his amazing work at adamnathanielfurman.com. It is quite remarkable. I've never seen anything like it and is very distinctive, and I have a feeling that people in the future will be looking back and talking about Furman and his impact on the world of design. Now, before we jump into today's show, I'd like to invite you and ask you a question. Would you like to be behind the mic here at the Business of Architecture show? I'm looking for proposals for conducting an interview that would be of incredible value for our audience. And if you submit one, I'll consider it for inclusion here on the show. This is your chance to make an impact on the ongoing dialogue about architecture through this podcasting medium. And heck, it's just kind of fun. So here's what to do if you'd like to take a shot at this. Send an email to me, Enoch, at businessofarchitecture.com. Tell me who you will interview and why you are the right person for the job. Any other details that you'd like to include about why I should pick you, send that over as well. I really hope that you take this opportunity. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, here's today's show.
Brilliant. So good morning and welcome to the Business of Architecture in the UK edition. And I'm here with the inspiring Adam Nathaniel Furman. Have I said your name correctly?
Absolutely. Hello.
Brilliant. And I'm here in your amazing studio come apartment, which is just filled with the most intense, brilliant collection of architectural tomes and monographs and books and
ceramics
and just all sorts of incredible collectibles. And some of you may know Adam because you probably follow him on Instagram, and Adam is quite you've got your fingers in so many different pies in lots of different things, and I think what you're doing is really, it's just unique, and I think it's very inspiring and refreshing to, what we were just talking about before we started recording, just hearing about your ideas on architecture, on being an architect. So I suppose to start the conversation, I'd like, how would you describe yourself?
So I can't call myself an architect because I'm not registered, but obviously I'm deeply embedded within architecture, and I studied architecture, I teach architecture, I have taught it, I run a research group at the Architectural Association, and I work on projects that can be described as architectural in every way. But I refer to myself as a designer just simply because I think it's more of a catch-all.
Yeah,
it doesn't have a legal title associated with it, and it encompasses everything from the design of a mug. Obviously, I've got these mugs on sale at the moment at the Soane Museum, to research to the design of buildings, facades. So it's just because it's an all-encompassing catch-all phrase.
Yeah.
So I call myself designer.
And so you've got lots of kind of activities of entrepreneurial activities from. Just explain a few of the different things that you're doing, and then I want to talk to us about your social media presence and how you built that up.
So in terms of my activities, I currently teach. I'm a tutor at Central St Martin's Architecture, so that's a nice sort of grounding annually. It sort of keeps me going to the office every week, and being inspired by young students. I also am a journalist, so I write for various publications, which keeps my brain ticking over. I try particularly on that to be positive reviewer. I like to share inspirational things rather than criticizing. So I tend to accept commissions for projects that I know that I've got something positive to say about it or to contribute to. I also do quite a lot of research. I think the side of that you see coming out on social media. So a lot of that research just sort of like ends up on Tumblr and in Instagram, and people enjoy that very much. But that's also turning into concrete things like a book, which I've got coming out for Reba called Revisiting Postmodernism, which I've written with Sir Terry Farrell.
Yeah.
So that's coming out at the end of this month. The research, I mentioned a research group at the Architectural Association, looks at colour as is a sort of active agent in architecture and urbanism.
Yeah.
And we've been running events and holding symposiums and publishing research texts for the past 6 years. So we've got like quite an amazing archive online for that. As well as in my own practice, which is myself, and then I work with freelance people on various projects. I do installations, just had Gateways, which was a pretty successful installation at London Design Festival.
Which looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it was. The public responded so well that King's Cross asked to keep it for a few days, actually, after the event, because sort of by
that was
general agreement.
A collaboration of Land of Ceramics, was it? Or
Turkish Ceramics.
Ceramics,
their Twitter and Instagram handle is Land of Ceramics because someone else has Turkish Ceramics.
Right.
Yeah, it's the national body that represents all Turkish ceramic manufacturers in the country, Turkey. So and that's the second biggest manufacturing country in the world for ceramics. So they got clout and they've got good funding, and they've been really good to work for. But I also do interiors.
Yep.
I'd love to do more. So basically anything architectural. So currently I've got interiors projects, I think, which someone of my age is quite common to start with. And as well as doing product design. And whatever comes my way. Really.
Yeah, and it's all got your kind of unique stamp, like your sort of expression. Your colourful.
I think that's been quite good. I was just talking to you before about the fact that I have worked for other offices for a very long time, and on the side I've done my own projects, and I think part of that was that it allowed me to be very selective in the projects that I chose to accept. Or that I chose to go for. Yeah. In the sense that rather than desperately needing work, because I had to sort of, get money in. Yeah. I like living well. It was a matter of, does this client like what I do? Do they like my proposal? Or is it a particular brief? I didn't want to do kitchen extensions. Is it a particular brief that I find really exciting, where I feel like I can push the boundaries of my aesthetic, which is going to be good for my portfolio? Yeah. So I can be really selective. So what that's allowed me is over the past 8 years to build up a portfolio, which means nobody at all is ever going to come to me as a client expecting to get a John Pawson interior. So it's actually now allowed me to get work in. And
so that was kind of developed as a result of you kind of work whilst you're working other practices that kind of always gave you the safety net so you could be that selective.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I didn't need it. Yeah. Practically speaking. And actually, and I was very lucky that all the practices that I worked in were like hugely supportive of me doing my own work. Not just me, also other people in the offices. So, and it was also because I've worked for kind of, I think, practitioners who are quite creative as well now, and also when they were younger, and they also had unusual paths. So, for instance, when I was working at Ron Arad, there were quite a few of us in the office who'd be actually everyone, for instance, on my side of the desk. We were all doing our own projects, and Ron was like super supportive of it. So it was also being in an environment where everyone else was doing something similar. Yeah. And we were all doing the same thing in the sense of we were using our income to kind of keep us happy. Yeah. And then using our free time to keep us even happier creatively. Yeah, yeah. So yeah.
Brilliant. And how have you been using Instagram? Because also that's a lot how I've been kind of following your work was kind of, I saw this intense Instagram that had the most fascinating selection of images, and I was like, I've got to talk to this guy. And then, it's you've got like an Instagram following of, you're saying 16,500, which is the kind of following that lots of architectural practices would absolutely kill for. Exactly. So many people want to know.
And it's actually, what I'm particularly happy with is that it's a very good group of people following. So I tend to get big bumps of people following because someone recommends it, and then most of them unfollow. So, and I retain only and it's mostly architects and designers with an open mind, rather than like people who want clickbait or just want kind of like large photos of repetitious facades that look pretty and don't give them information. That's what I think. So I tend to, because of the stuff I post and because there's so much of it, I tend to weed out non-committed followers. I think that segues into how it's been really helpful for me in terms of my work and getting commissions, because I think I tend to get only really committed followers who are really passionate, and that's led to the kinds of people following me who then get in contact because they actually want to do stuff. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit how you started the Instagram account, how it began.
How did it begin? I think someone joined for me. Because I was saying that I'm a very slow adopter, but once I adopt something, then I sort of go a bit nuts. So Facebook, my students joined me. Like, I gave them my details and they joined me. And obviously now I'm like totally all over it. And I think Instagram, I think it was my brother or something, I'm not sure, who joined me into it, set up my account, and then I just very slowly started to feel my way through it. I remember for the first few months, like posting, I didn't understand what it was for, so I was like posting photos of a windowsill that like looked terrible, but I thought, but there's light, and is it arty? Like, I don't know, like, am I meant to post arty stuff?
Yeah.
And then like some railings, and I had like 0 followers for quite a long time. And then I kind of cottoned on to the idea, and then I started to see, because I obviously followed a lot of people that I liked.
Yeah.
And then I started to see what I enjoyed in other people's posts and learn from that. And the thing that I enjoyed the most was, on the one hand, people sharing just in a very boring way, in like an architectural historical way, sharing buildings that they saw in everyday life.
Yep.
And they found out what it was. Yep. And then they shared it. And there was a little bit of like, oh my God, did you know that this little building on this high street in Berkminster was by Richard Norman Shaw?
Yeah.
And it's just that little bit of joy that happens. Or there is one account of, I can't remember his name, but he only posts photos. And I don't necessarily like accounts that only do one thing, but he only posts photos of blind windows, and it was just really lovely. It was just really lovely to follow that. And also,
there's like a depth, isn't there, to those? That makes it more interesting.
It's kind of like geeky obsession. Yeah, he just loves them.
Yeah,
and they're very interesting actually.
Yeah,
like, and he finds stories behind them. And then the other thing I liked was I thought that you could only post your own photos.
Right.
But then I saw that actually other people I saw people posting the stuff that they'd scanned or stuff that they found online. I was like, oh, copyright?
Yeah.
And then actually, no, there's like basically no copyright issues on Instagram. You just like basically post anything. It's just super, super lax. So I was like, oh, well.
What are the copyright rules then on that? They're just non-existent?
Yeah, it's, I mean, effectively you can just, I personally, whenever I know where an image is from, I post the image source, but very often it's like a probably 15 million times removed from a Tumblr.
Yeah.
Or if I scan it from a book, very often like I just kind of put it in. Occasionally I'll mention the magazine it's from, but I very, very often will leave it. If I post in other areas that are non-social media, it's completely different.
Yeah.
So like I cite the photographer and the copyright issues, but no, it's very lax. If it's from another Instagram account, obviously you have to say where they're from, and it's a repost. And but it's effectively, social media has different rules.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, well then I can actually just start posting things that I like or that I come across.
Yeah.
And so my research then started to just bleed into the page, and I started to post things from what I was looking at. What I was researching, things that I scanned, things that I came across on the internet, and just posting them directly onto the account. And that's where it kind of took off.
Yeah, it looks like it's become quite an obsession. Like it's it's epic. It's like it's really, really quite a fascinating thing to kind of engage with. And it was interesting. What do you think is the mistakes that lots of architects or designers or people do with their Instagram accounts that make them totally unstimulating?
Because the thing is, I tend to not follow the unstimulating ones, so it's difficult to say. But I mean, from the kind of corporate, but like the kind of practices that I've seen who post, I think the ones, if it's like a smaller office or a medium-sized office, the ones that tend to really work are the ones where like perhaps the owner of the office, it's like treated as their personal account.
Yeah. And
there's like a lot of personal thought, sharing of events, visits to site, little tidbits of like the creative process. So very personal.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of quantity. The worst ones are where it's like Instagram by committee, you know, and it's like, we had the Christmas party, yay! And we just won Architects Journal Interior Retrofit Award of the Year, yay! You know, and great. Yeah. And it's like once a week.
It's kind of me-centric type of thing, but not actually showing anything.
It's basically press releases, you know, effectively. And it's like, well, you know, we all get press releases in our email. Like we don't really, you're not going to follow that on Instagram. Instagram's about a short burst of inspiration, effectively. That's what you want from your photo. Either that short burst of inspiration or something that gets you talking and commenting. And yeah, the office Christmas party or your AJ Retrofit Award is not going to win you any fans at all. And I was just saying that the bigger offices, sometimes, I think you mentioned Rochester Harbour, and I was talking about SOM and Bothville, they have more resourcing, and perhaps the ones who actually allocate a staff member or a couple of staff members the responsibility of running the Instagram feed, who can really take ownership over it, and who also have access to the archives and also have access to like current site visits and project photos. They can be great. Like SOMs is really enjoyable because you're getting like history, you're getting current stuff, and they insert within that the corporate, we just won the best award of the year for this, and then you don't mind so much because there's a lot of like kind of really interesting content that's it's couched around.
And it's really interesting as well because when we consume social media, we're in a certain mind space, or we've consumed so much of it that we know what we're looking for, and it tends to be something that's just authentic. And when it's not an authentic message, it just doesn't land.
Yeah, we have like whiskers, no?
Yeah,
we're like super sensitive. Like that's fake.
Yeah, exactly.
That's forced.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that was generated by an algorithm, or like a poor comms person in an office who has no ability to be allowed to write for herself or himself.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh no.
Yeah,
not gonna look at that.
Exactly, and we're super sort of sensitive to that. And when that authenticity is not there, you kind of like your attention, it's gone. Yeah, that's it. And then the media, the feed or the post becomes irrelevant and kind of like
people don't follow.
Yeah,
or they unfollow. So yeah, I mean, and particularly in architecture, because our subject matter is not exactly dancing and singing.
Yeah,
in its own right, you know. So I think extra effort needs to be made to try and engage.
Yeah.
On a personal level.
And how have you grown it? Because I know that you're involved in lots of kind of advocacy and like campaigns, like for postmodernism, and you're involved in like, you know, just starting new conversations that perhaps are sometimes unpopular in the sort of mainstream architectural.
Yeah, I mean, normally that's possibly why I'm drawn to them, because there are vacant spaces.
Yeah,
right, because they're not popular. So that's why I tend to start these conversations.
Yeah, and all of that has kind of helped you set up what is now your, like, would you call it a practice, or would you call it just your way of practicing?
Well, it's my practice, but the practice is me. And then I collaborate with people on individual projects, but I'm an individual operator. Yeah. I think Instagram is like where effectively like there's lots of conversations that we are having, because it's all sort of lots of people. And Instagram is just effectively where this all comes together. So there's like the visual material from various things I'm looking at, researching and talking about tend to come together and get posted on the Instagram. Yeah. So it's sort of like it's the compost heap of it. It all comes together. But these conversations that I've set up, so postmodernism, which was initially just a fight and then turned into a conversation later on, a really important part of that has been the Facebook group Postmodern Society, which has now just sort of exploded into this sort of like thing with 15,000 people, and it's not as interesting as it was before, where there were just like 1,000 people having really intense conversations of a lot of depth. And still now there's key members who are amazing. Yeah, a lot of them are not architects. It's actually really, really interesting how non-architects who have an incredible knowledge about architecture have been really, really key to pushing the conversation forward. So that was very helpful. But then also a lot of advocacy in the press. So I wrote a lot of articles, initially being supported by very few publications because nobody wanted to write about postmodernism unless it was critical. And BD was actually, I think, the first one who were really helpful in responding in terms of trying to campaign to save buildings. Because I think the reason I sort of like really came out and started advocating was because they started demolishing some really good postmodern architecture, particularly Terry Farrell's. And my point was like we really don't have very much good postmodern architecture in this country. It's not like the United States where they're just awash with it. Like we have like 8 good buildings. We have hardly any. It's not like brutalism where there's great architecture everywhere because the state was building so much of it. So I was horrified by the fact that we were losing some of them. So I just went full out advocating. But so through legal channels also, because I tried to list Landmark House, the Midland Bank building, failed, but then there was an uproar about the language that was used by Historic England for not supporting it. And then when I went and then I lodged an application to list Comin Ching, which was being defaced. And then Historic England kind of had to rally behind us. And got that to be the first postmodern building ever listed in the UK. And so that was a big campaign, which went really well. And that was hand in hand with all the writing in magazines and hand in hand also with the Postmodern Society on Facebook, which was really helping develop ways to counteract arguments that other people were putting forward for, like, why should we demolish these buildings? Why we should hate them? Twitter was more like effectively trying to emoliate sort of calm down the critics who refused to allow this kind of architecture or any architecture in this period to have any airspace, or to be respected in any way, or to be taken seriously in any way. And that worked quite well. I mean, it never reached a point where there was agreement at all, but it reached a point where there was a space that was allowed for these things to be considered not evil. And Instagram initially was just this side thing. Yeah. It's just like, it's just like nice images, and I started posting, and then I was like, my God, I've started to get loads of followers. Yeah. And then I started getting messages about like potential work and stuff. So Instagram actually, in many ways, has started to become more of a much broader sort of way of directing taste. Yeah. So modifying broader taste issues. So the other sort of areas, media areas, have been, I guess, to do with changing the debate. Yeah. Discussion, discursive, textual, to do with conversations. Instagram has literally been about acquainting people with the qualities of a particular way of designing, or particular ways, because it's not only postmodernism. I've also been trying to advocate for color in architecture. Yeah. Also been trying to advocate for classicism. Yeah. And stealing it out of the hands of the trad architects. Yeah. And trying to show that it's a creative thing that can still be used as just as relevant, and still applicable, and it's got relevance. And it's just as relevant as classical architecture. It's just it's been stolen by the right wing. Yeah. And also Edwardian architecture. So there's kind of quite a lot of various things that have been coming together on the Instagram feed, and it's been really nice to see how people from the beginning, like, no likes on Edwardian buildings, no likes on sort of kind of postmodern architecture, and then now loads. And it's because simply once people start seeing many of something, it's like, I think sometimes people come to a new city and all the buildings look the same. So my boyfriend, when he first came to London, he was like, everything looks the same. I'm like, really? Where's he from? Milan. I thought Milan looks the same. Okay, it all looked the same to me in Milan, though, when I went there. And it's like, I think London is a city of great architectural diversity, but then, it's because he's new to it. And then the more he's lived here, now he's like, it's the most diverse, it's wonderful, there's so many different architectures, I wish we had this in Milan. And it's simply a matter of becoming acquainted with a context or a way of designing that you then start to differentiate between all the small variations, right? And then it becomes a whole world. Whereas if from the outside you only are acquainted with brutalism or like neo-Chipperfield minimalism, right? You look at anything perma, anything that has color, anything that's sort of complex, anything that uses collage, you're just like, perma. Yeah. Whereas actually there's an entire giant universe within that once you start seeing many of them on a feed, for instance, my feed, you start differentiating between them, and suddenly London becomes full of many different buildings. Got it. Yeah. So you're essentially educating. It's like that's what visually educating. It's like visually education resource. But it shows how there's people like who hilariously think that taste is not acquired. Yeah. Because I've seen people's taste change. I mean, they constantly change. My tastes change. I'm just very aware. So like I don't shit on the things I don't like, because I'm aware that my dislike, unless it's based on kind of practical, operational, functional issues, is likely to change in the future. So I'm kind of reflexively aware that like my dislike is not objective to a certain degree. And so this is separate to issues of quality of construction, relationship to city. It's aesthetic. And so it's really nice to see how you can shift people's tastes and that people start to become aware that tastes are changeable. Yeah. And I can tell people who say, no, taste is objective. This is just bad. This is just bad taste. This is just awful, which I still get all the time. Even from like really serious academics. It's hilarious. Yeah. They're still convinced that their aesthetic tastes are like somehow objective. that this very much absolutely objectively proves that taste is acquired, modifiable, constantly changeable, based upon social circumstances, based upon what you see and what you're acquainted with. That's it. So it's been fun.
Yeah. No, and it is. It's absolutely, because that is like, in that's how you've kind of created this kind of dialogue and an audience, which in turn, how have people been approaching you for work then? How is it kind of
DMing?
How long did it take for you to sort of for this conversation and your passions to turn into into projects? And what's the future for your practice? How do you envision it? Because it was interesting, you were saying earlier as well about it's, and I don't hear architects talk about this very often, is like designing a practice which suits their lifestyle.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you haven't heard that.
Yeah. Well,
that's the key to having a...
Well, no, totally. And I hear it in the sort of other circles a lot, like entrepreneurial circles, people when they're starting up the business.
There's a lot of discussion at the moment about how to balance your
having
a good life with actually...
Yeah, exactly. Like being a lifestyle entrepreneur, you're designing a business because you want it like hands-free, it's automated, it's digital, it's kind of online, you can live, work wherever you want.
Yeah.
Whereas in architectural circles, sometimes we get a bit kind of, we only think there's one way of running a practice.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day, I was like... The model of there's many models of practice, but we were just brought up at the AA with a particular model of practice, which was the kind of Zaha Farshid Musavi model, which was you kill yourself for your job. Like you don't sleep for a year, and your interns have to go to psychologists after they finish the project, and you divorce because you can't have a normal family, and it's simply not sustainable in the sense of why do it? Because why even design something that requires that if it's going to kill your life and mean that you won't be able to design more in the future?
Yeah.
And I think there's very much hopefully amongst my generation, very much with me, a desire to factor that lifestyle aspect into both the designs that I do and the way that the commissions that I accept and the way that I work day to day.
Yeah.
That's not what I do. That I manage to produce things that I'm happy with, but also I have a lifestyle which allows me to have time free.
Yeah.
Time with my partner.
Yeah.
Time with my family.
Yeah.
And that I don't, end up an emotional wreck.
Yeah.
Or dying at 55.
Exactly. And as you say, when that balance is present, then the work is better.
No, I'm not sure. I wouldn't
say that.
No, I wouldn't say that. No, because I absolutely no. I think it just makes for better offices. It makes for better human beings. But no, Zaha's. But our Foreign Office building is brilliant. Absolutely. It's just, my God.
Yeah.
I remember when I went to see an exhibition at the ICA, that place that doesn't really do very much anymore. But back in 2002 or 3 or something, there was the exhibition on the Yokohama Ferry Terminal building.
Yeah.
Incredible project. I don't know if you visited it.
I've never visited it, but
absolutely brilliant.
It's one of those projects that is often like in somebody's studio in the architecture school, always open on that page, or you're like copying details off it.
Unfortunately, it's like non-reproducible. Again, a project that killed them. And there was the exhibition on it, and they proudly, because again, there was this sort of culture when I was growing up in architecture of showing off how much work.
Yeah.
Right. It's not. There were I think it was 1,500 pages of drawings, and they just had this stack. It was a mountain of drawings, as if that was quality.
Yeah,
it's like they didn't even show. It's like you walked in, you didn't see the building, you saw this stack of drawings, and it was kind of interesting because the building's brilliant, doesn't need that, And actually, as far as I'm concerned, great art should look effortless.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's not. It's like a jewel.
Yeah,
or a watch that. Because the design's shit, it has to show off, which Yokohama's not shit, but it's just in principle, right? These luxury products that have to show off the amount of work, like this insanely overly ornate amount of craft that goes into the back of the watch that's left clear so that you can see all of the hours that you're paying for. So it's a quantitative thing rather than something about the quality of the design.
Yeah.
And for instance, that project didn't need that. You know? It was brilliant design. So... for instance, in my work, it's actually it's the opposite. It's a matter of how little drawing can I do to make something really good.
Yeah.
Can I Photoshop a scribble? in conversation with a contractor instead of producing a whole new set of drawings. You know, that's effectively like just
it's much more like actually.
Can I FaceTime with the contractor?
Yeah, it's much more about the communication. And getting the idea expressed.
Yeah,
and then getting
not
it
beautiful,
realized.
or either beautiful construction drawings or drawings that are just like quantitatively like totally unnecessary. It just screams of potentially screams of a kind of inefficiency that could be possibly avoided. And similarly at OMA, there was a culture of you couldn't leave. Like the less you slept, it was a kind of very macho culture of the less you slept, the cooler you were.
Yeah.
You know, so I've been in offices in the past where, and it's not the office's fault. It's just a kind of communal culture that had developed over the years. Sort of people would be sitting at 8 o'clock twiddling their thumbs and like clicking around on the internet because they just felt that they had to be in the office, and they'd like stay until 10 for no reason. And in OMA, like it was the same thing. Like first day I was kept until 4 a.m. I was kept until 4 a.m. in the office, and it wasn't really because any work needed to be done. It was just this sort of culture of producing huge quantities of work. Somehow, because you just had to do it, and it was 98% of what I did there didn't turn into anything. And again, it's not a critique of them. It's just I think it's a generational shift possibly that's just like that was great and an amazing stuff came out of it, but possibly again like in tech, I think there's been a similar shift.
So what do you think is the sort of shift for young architects, people coming out of university? What would you advise, or what kind of like guidance would you suggest, like to break away from that kind of culture, or for like setting up practices, or for like, how do you see the future, the profession kind of?
I think there's been
changing.
There's been a really nice shift generally. So like I think this my attitude is part of a much broader change. There's do you remember that great campaign that was led by numerous people, but I think BD and AJ and lots of independent practitioners against unpaid internships.
Oh yeah.
So and that I think we've forgotten about that debate, but it worked really well. It was amazing, and I think there's this notion that there's an understanding that first of all on that side, you're locking people out on lower incomes because like work is work, and you can't effectively subsidize officers through the parents of interns, which is what was happening. And on well, I mean, it was. Yeah. I mean, that was the business model. I mean, I've heard there's still architect offices around the world that still operate in that way, but it's become so ethically unpalatable in Britain. It doesn't. I think, as far as I'm aware, it really doesn't happen here anymore.
Yeah, in places where, like in Japan, it's much more. It's a commonplace thing for it to.
Yeah, I mean, Japan is a cultural thing. It's it's almost all offices there.
Yeah,
but I think Big does it. But someone told me the other day that I don't want to say names because it's just that's just hearsay. Whereas in Japan, I know it's a cultural thing generally. But I know that here it's not. It's changed massively. And I saw that, for instance, when I was working in Farrell's. Like, it's, they literally treat their part ones and their interns as employees.
Yeah.
Fully. And I mean, I don't want to go into details, but it's great there. And I know that it's the same in most other major offices now, and even a lot of medium-sized and smaller offices. So on the one hand, there's that, which is fantastic, but also there's an issue of working culture, which has changed. So from my experience of the offices I've come across, I'm not sure what it's like in small design offices like, I don't know, 6A or Caruso St. John. I don't know how they are now, but in a lot of medium-sized practices, the kind of extreme late night culture has really reduced. And I think there is an understanding, for instance, that like a lot of younger people need to have a life, right? And there isn't this need for them to sort of sleep under the desk and stuff. So the late, all-nighters do happen.
Yeah.
It's just because our profession is inherently inefficient, right? We're creatives fundamentally, although nobody likes to admit that. So there are always going to be terrible late nights where decisions have been made late. We've gone through 15 options, and that's fine. But it's all the stuff in between, and I think that's very much reduced as far as I've understood. And so, I mean, talking to my students in St. Martin's, now they're going out looking for officers. I really do ask them or suggest that they speak to other people who've worked in an office before and ask about office culture, because I think more important than the design an office produces is the office culture of how they treat their staff.
Yeah.
How they deal with responsibility.
Yeah.
And sort of just what the environment is like on a human level.
Yeah.
And again, I think about these things for myself, when I'm working by myself now and what projects I take on, but I'm also very highly advising my students to send their antennas out beforehand so that they don't end up in situations that will make them hate architecture and be depressed, which happens. I mean, you spend all your hours in that place.
Yeah, no, and it's a concerning trend that happens, and it's kind of like how to mitigate against it and have people empowered in their choices and where they want to go and how they want to kind of express themselves in the world of architecture.
Yeah, I mean, offices. I think offices are so much better than they were before, which is great. But like you say, I think. Do you find a lot of your students are actually they're quite sort of entrepreneurially minded, or they realize at university that there's lots of other ways that they could make a living from architecture, or like they're engaged in different things online and they're selling drawings, for example. Like, I mean, I've seen a lot of students who are kind of doing things like that where they start actually monetizing projects from early on. Is that something that's kind of like a popular trend, or is it? Well, I mean, I teach in one university.
Yeah.
Well, I'm involved in the A because of the research cluster. I think students are way more business savvy than they were before, which is great. But I think the majority still very much, which is good because the profession needs them. Is they want to go and they want to leave, go to an office, get a placement, do their part 3, which is great. I teach intermediate, so then they'll do their part 1 placement, then come back and do part 2, and then do part 3. But I think sort of broadly speaking, most people still want to go down that route. But I think there are a few very, very keyed up students, and it should never be more than that, because obviously the majority of the profession needs to go and work as kind of architects, project architects. But there are sort of the 10% who are through social media, because before it was much more difficult to see people who were doing things differently. Through social media, very aware that there's other models that they can follow, but it's difficult to say models because there's no clear tracks. I was talking to one particular student who I adore on Tuesday, and she was saying, is your route something I can follow down? I was just explaining to her, I think, look, study what I've done. Study what other people have done who have gone down different routes and different paths. But because she's a sort of very creative person, like most creative people, has an unusual particular mix of things she's interested in. They're never the same, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, don't copy it, but be aware that maybe you can cherry pick some of the things that some of us have done. So for instance, my career was very helped by having the Design Museum residency.
Yeah,
hugely helped. I mean, it's like that sort of helped kick everything off. The British School at Rome Prize.
Yeah.
So there are these things that have along the way given me kicks, and other people I know have similarly had bursaries or won prizes that have really helped them go down the particular route they wanted. So I was telling her, like, research those. Look for bursaries, look what other people have done, and find the ones that are relevant for you. And then once you get 1 or 2 of those and you start going off in your own direction, you'll find your own journey.
You find footing, yeah.
But yeah, I think there's about 10% of students that through social media are aware that that architecture is not just grumpy old men on the part 3 panel, telling you your crap, and telling Zaha she's not an architect. It's possibly many other things, and it's quite interesting, and it would be nice to see the profession embrace that, which it doesn't yet.
And you were saying, actually, you made an interesting point about how you can see the profession going in the UK either one of 2 ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a debate that's happening in the RIBA at the moment. It's been happening for the past 4 years. But I mean, on the one hand, it can retrench and it can go back towards the way it is in most other countries, which is a sort of professionally protected title situation, which is highly controlled, where the practice is protected as well as the title, because there's obviously been this very weird situation where the title's protected but not the practicing of the profession. Or we can sort of increase the Venn diagrams of what's included within the understanding of the architectural profession, and start to embrace people like myself. There's a lot of us who are doing unusual mixes of work within their career, but that all falls under the remit of something that is considered architectural.
Yes.
Whether it's architectural discourse, architectural production, whether it's interior design, but kind of people who have come from architecture and branched out slightly. That I think if they increase what is considered architect, I think then they take ownership over the new directions in which the new sort of diffuse directions in which the practice of building and making is going. And I have a feeling, I personally think that if that was codified, that would be a hugely empowering thing for the RIBA, for instance. But
how do you mean?
Hugely empowering in the sense that it starts to represent a demographic or a group that is growing in prominence and power and relevance economically.
Yeah.
Rather than one that's absolutely shrinking, disappearing, unable to find its place, even within like really standard construction projects and, design groups. Like, the architect's got a massive sense of identity crisis.
Yeah.
So I think it's not throwing out those roles of the architect, the traditional roles, but like adding new ones.
Yeah, just expanding what it is
and defining what those are and how they relate to each other. And I think that would empower the RIBA because that part of the profession is growing so much.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it would be very, very good for everyone.
Yeah,
and there is, and I know that there's discussion about this. They're talking about affiliate memberships and all kinds of things, but it would just
it would further it along. Yeah,
it would be really nice if they kind of actively pursued that broadening of the understanding of the profession.
Brilliant.
And they don't have to necessarily use the title, right? The title can stay, but it's like who's part of the group.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it shows like it puts architects. It will do a lot of value for the title architect, knowing that it's kind of much more multifaceted and engaged with lots of different areas and disciplines.
Yeah, I mean the title. I don't necessarily mean the title. The title doesn't have to broaden, but it's like these affiliations could be really good for the title of architect, and it's it's like having backup. Right, you're not alone.
Yeah, totally.
Look, we got a quarter of the creative industries are part of Arken, right? Yeah. So I think it could be exciting and really positive. And I see there's so many practitioners I see who are like this, and I think there is but I think the core of the industry, understandably, like taxi drivers, they want to protect their economic area.
Yeah.
Right. For instance, you see Heatherwick, right? The way that he's obviously being attacked now because of the Garden Bridge catastrophe. But even before that, people were just desperately waiting to tear him down. Desperately. I mean, they were just literally like chihuahuas waiting for someone to walk past so they could just attack them. And you can just see the glee with which the architectural profession has piled in on just tearing his reputation apart because he's an outsider. He's an affiliate person who works in architecture, but he's done wonders for
totally
the way that British architecture, and I say architecture, is seen by the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Just broadening the horizon and sort of having them all encompassing. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to me. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and
thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
That is a wrap. As a podcast listener, get access to my free 4-part architecture firm profit map by going to freearchitectgift.com. You can also get it by texting the phrase profit map, that's 2 words, to the phone number 773-770-4377. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of BQE Core. BQE Core is office management software for architects. Peter Drucker famously said, "What's measured improves." BQE Core lets you easily measure your key financial performance indicators, and it's dead simple. Get insights on the profitability of your firm with a beautiful and easy to customize graphical dashboard. Core gives you the power you need to grow your firm and keep your hard-earned profit. And they have pricing structures that work for the smallest of sole practitioners to the largest of firms. Learn more and get a free trial at businessofarchitecture.com/demo. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.